All right, so it is the start of day one for me. Everyone else has already began a little while ago, but I had to start today because I was working on 11 Inventions 10. I finished that a bit late, so I'm starting on it now. Right now, I have three sort of tricks I want to start on first. I'm not going to finish them all today, but that's what I want to start on. I have a trick where I want to have two balls sort of duel around each other until they eventually go closer together, and then the frisbee will tilt because of weight. We'll see how that goes. I have a trick where I want a ball to spin around this thing multiple times due to some backspin contraption, and then I want to have a cup that does a little spinny thing. So we'll see how these tricks evolve and actually turn out once I build them, but this is the start of my plans. All right, so it is the end of day 8, and I have about as much built as I did 7 days ago, because I haven't built in 7 days. That would explain that. Now, I can explain. For some context, I finished 11 Inventions 10 immediately before this event started. And the reason why that's prevalent is because it ate up basically all of my time and like thinking space right before this event. So I had no time for any sort of pre-planning or pre-building, like nothing to do with how I was going to go about building this machine was on my mind, because I was just focused on getting 11 Inventions 10 out and polished and looking good, and that was my main goal. And that video ended up looking really good, but unfortunately, I had to go into this event pretty much completely blind as a result, and it has not been very fun so far. On day 1, I came up with, or on day 1 of me actually building, which was like day 2 or 3, I started making the frisbee trick. I made most of it what it is basically right now, which involves circular ball paths and like a cool symmetrical sort of way. And I'd came up with a couple other ideas, but all of them looked really, really similar. Like especially particularly similar to the frisbee trick in a sense that all of them involved sort of circular ball paths. And part of me really didn't like that, and I could not for the life of me envision a way to arrange those tricks in a way that would like make a cohesive machine, if that makes any sense. And so I didn't have really much motivation to work on this machine. And then the symmetry or the symmetrical frisbee trick was giving me some problems in the first couple days, and so I was just generally getting pretty frustrated, and so I wanted to take a break to actually do some real pre-planning / pre-building / whatever you want to call it, and at this point I think I am ready to start tackling the machine. But yeah, I'm basically filming this to get sort of a before image of like what the machine looked like. Obviously, if you're watching this now, you know what the full machine looks like. I currently don't. So I'm just trying to, I want to get that comparison of like how closely my pre-planning actually matches up with what I want to build in the final product, or what I'm going to build in the final product. So my general idea is I want to start in this area of the machine with some sort of like cup and hammer for an object trick. I want to transition over to like a little spinny cup thing that'll be a 1-ball path in conjunction with this next trick, which will involve like magnet tracks that snap and form together. I then want to transition into this sort of weird track trick where you have tracks that are orbiting around another track and they're spinning at different speeds while doing so. And then transition into this frisbee trick, which I've showed sort of earlier, which I built mostly 7 days ago, but it's still not done yet. And then I want to go into another sort of 1-ball path segment, which is a similar, I guess there's sort of a similar vibe throughout some aspects of this machine, in the sense that there's, once again, similar to my Domino World 2020 machine, there's a lot of 1-ball paths, but the interesting thing about this machine, at least for what I have pre-planned, is that each of the main 1-ball paths, at least this one, and this one, all involve 2 tricks in a row that are part of the 1-ball path sequence. The only exception to that being this 1-ball path, which is going to be just a sort of standard regular ping pong ball track trick 1-ball path, but it'll still look cool. But anyway, I want to do something with flexing crosses and this ping pong ball in like a cup sort of trick to transition over here, and then I'm going to have like a little spinny thing that is gonna, the ball's going to stay inside the cup due to centrifugal force, and then it's going to come out and it'll transition it out in the corner of the table. Very similar path order to Domino World 2020, which is sort of what I'm going for, because it's something that I'm, I guess a left to right machine is just easy for me to process in this current building room that I'm in. But yeah, generally that's my idea, and hopefully
Hopefully you're seeing this video right now, because that means that I actually did make it. And I didn't fail again.
Alright, so it has been quite a while since my last update. In fact, it is currently September 2nd. If you've seen Domino World events in the past, you know that like normally we build for around a week, and then we set things off, we finish. Not this year. This year we go for 2 months. But the machine's done. I guess that's the saving grace of the time wasted. I am genuinely really happy with how it turned out. I'm glad that I ended up pushing through and finishing it. And yeah, so now I'll spend a bit of time sort of going through each individual trick and section and how it sort of changed from my initial plans 2 months ago. Alright, so I'll first talk about this initial section with the cup stack and the gear ball lift. So my initial plan for the cup stack is pretty much exactly how it ended up panning out. There was no real problems with the idea itself. My initial inspiration for this idea was from Trick Shot Machine, which is the machine I built with Lyle way back when, with the tilting structure that had a very similar look to this when it was tilted onto either side. And that was sort of, I guess, the imprint in my mind initially. I've recently been shown, or I guess 2 months ago I was shown, that BWRGMs did a similar idea to this. But I guess the key difference is that this cup stack falls into one and then tips over afterward as a result of that, and then also transports a ball as sort of the result of that. There it is. That's a trick. I guess the other key difference is that I was not planning on using the negative space of the cup once it's gone. I was just planning to use it initially as a cup stack and then like maybe have the path change or something like that, but I decided to sort of make use of this negative space here. When the cup is there initially, the ball will go across the cup and then it'll fall over, and then when it's gone, it'll actually go down onto this trampoline, which I made out of like a purple balloon that's older than I am, apparently, because it's from like an old back that my mom found in the house. But anyway, I made a trampoline out of it with like using a mouse trap catcher thing. You can't really see it. You can kind of see it. There it is, mouse trap catcher. Mousetrap machine reference, which is really interesting sort of end connection for this. And so that's sort of the main thing that changed with that. With the mallet ball lift, the only thing I really had planned for this was mallet ball lift. Basically, I was planning for that sort of one step to be the main thing that happens. If this was a real event, that's probably what I would have done, is just the one step. I was not really expecting this to become a 4-use element, or at least like an element in which 4 separate things happen. Basically, like there's the initial step of the hammer tilting like a lever and causing the gear to roll down. And then there's the actual gear unwinding this little string winder thing, and then causing the muck. This is where I put muck, by the way. I always want to put muck in my machines. And because once again I don't have access to the stuffed animal version, put them on the lever because it was sort of the best place I could put them. It also just helps. I wanted to put something on this lever just to make it more visually apparent that this lever is important and that you should be looking at it, because most of the time you put a Knex lever in a machine, it's not really where people are supposed to be looking, and so muck was a good excuse to get people to draw their attention over here. But anyway, so that's sort of the second step, is just getting pulled along. The third step is what I initially had planned, the ball lift. Ball gets lifted, believe it or not. I know it's crazy. And then the final step is it actually gets used as a it gets used as a track, or at least half of one. The sort of rod of the mallet goes over and then it latches onto a magnet, and then the ball uses half of it as a rail. I can't speak today, apparently. So as for this second section over here, this sort of second one ball path area, there is really only one major change that happened from my initial plans. Actually, no. There's one other minor change. With the magnet tracks are essentially exactly what I had planned, because I already knew that this was a trick that worked. I built it for, I guess, technically built it for 11VC, aka built it for a separate project, and then it's gonna be an 11VC now. But regardless, the one thing that changed though is that I realized, because of the weight of the trick tracks that I'm using, my initial trick way back when I built it was just with dominoes as tracks, but this is using these little noodle tracks as tracks, which is different. And and that basically resulted in me having to make the angles much more tighter into each other. I initially thought I would be able to do each one 180 degrees, or not like each one like the same, facing the same direction, and then picking each other up. But they actually have to be 90 degrees off from each other in order to pick each other up. So there's a little bit less space there. Excuse me for the faraway camera angle and possible sudden lighting change. I have to charge my camera while I'm filming this part. But as for this second trick in this, or I guess technically the first trick chronologically in this second ball path section, this trick was completely different in terms of my initial plans. I initially planned to have a cup swinging thing, so there was like a central rod and a ball would go inside a cup and then it would swing around and stay inside due to like horizontal centrifugal force, and then be outputted onto that straw track. Obviously didn't work, or at least it kind of worked, but it was like really unsatisfying, and it was really difficult to reset, and it didn't work the way that I built it to work, and so I needed to come up with something different. I'm really happy with what I ended up coming up with. I instead built this little flexing parallelogram. Okay, I just snapped it onto the edge. I guess I can't play around with it. It's on the magnet now. But anyway, I built this little flexing parallelogram thing to sort of solve my spacing issue, because I knew that I wanted to have a launcher come out of this section. I already pre-built this, and shoot that Epco ball out into whatever the trick was going to be, and then have it be outputted here. The complicated part about that is that I needed the ball to enter one direction and then come out the other direction 180 degrees, which is really difficult to do on a rotation level, because if you have a cup facing like this way or whatever, the ball goes inside, it's then going to like spin around and then be facing this way. And I don't want the ball to come out this way, I want it to come out this way. So that was complicated. So the way I solved that was with flexing parallelogram, because it allows the cup to stay at the exact same position for the entire rotation. And it sort of led to this idea of having it in a way be self-powered, because the launch of the ball causes the thing to move. I didn't really end up needing any excess string pulls or anything manipulating it. It just sort of propels itself, and then the little suction of the cup is caused by a couple Connect pieces that sort of jam the ball inside. But yeah, I'm really happy with the overall effect that it has, especially considering it wasn't a planned trick. It just sort of happened as a result of spacing, which isn't something that normally happens, but it's pretty cool. So this third section over here was probably the most difficult trick of the entire machine, and it's for a number of reasons, but I guess one main reason I can sort of get to now is that it ties into this idea that my initial idea for this trick did not completely pan out. There's elements of my initial idea that panned out, but the full trick isn't really what it initially was. So basically what this trick is the ball goes down track. I guess that's pretty intuitive. Then this whole module rotates. This track will just turn 90 degrees and then lock itself into place, because it's just attached to the actual gear that's rotating, essentially. And then these tracks will like rotate and spin like crazy around it until they form the right angle. Now that in and of itself ended up being really difficult, and I'll get to that. I'll get to why that's the case. But my initial idea for this trick was actually even more complicated than that. It was initially going to have this trick. This track was going to spin at the same angle as these outer tracks, but it was also going to spin an extra amount. So like this track wasn't going to be secured to this gear section and then line up with these tracks perfectly. It was literally going to be like moving on its own at a separate speed to the outer tracks, and it was going to be really complicated and require multiple different activation points. Whereas this one only really requires one power source, which is just a single string pull, which pulls this fishing line around this whole module, which spins it. There's little wheels on the bottom that conveniently I only own 4 of from this random Connect set I got back in the day. So that was nice. But yes, that's how I made the main sort of framework of the structure. The reason why this trick ended up still being really difficult is because with the way these angles are, it's kind of difficult to explain. So the angles themselves, like right now these tracks are obviously aligned. If I were to just rotate these yellow tracks around and keep this track stationary, once they reach this point, they're not going to be horizontal. Like they're not even going to be vertical. They're not going to be at a 90-degree change at all. They're going to be at some random angle that I don't really know what it is right now, but they don't change their angles at a 90 degree when they reach those points, because there's so much rotation. It doesn't really line up that perfectly. It would only line up like that if I was using a big gear, like Lyle's trick from Rhett and Link machine, which was actually part of the inspiration for this trick. But my solution for that is also a little complicated, but it's just, it's a little intricate, I guess I could say, but it's not necessarily complicated. There's basically this little wheel on the bottom. Okay, you can't see it if I point the camera at my arm. There's this little wheel on the bottom. It spins the rod, the actual rod that it's attached to, which also spins the main structure. But it's not the thing that's being pulled. The important thing to note is that there's this little stopper here, and there's like a little latch along that wheel. And so when it starts to spin, it'll naturally start to spin the inner wheel, which it'll make it look like the tracks are sort of stuttering before they start spinning, like they're gonna stay vertical, and then they're going to start spinning all of a sudden. And that's basically the result of this little latch. It's going to rotate into the exact right angle position, and then the tracks can start doing their crazy spinny thing, and then I'll know that they're going to arrive at the exact right position to form that horizontal track in the end. Okay, I said that all without breathing, apparently. One of my favorite things about this trick, I really like the trick itself, but I also really like what I did with the sort of connection systems that go outside of it, because I knew I was going to have to do some outer connections that were interesting. For instance, instead of like a standard ball lift or a ball elevator, which I do every now and then, I made a makeshift sort of ball ski lift or ball diagonal slider. And so the ball goes into this little cap right here, and then it will just pull up as soon as the tracks reach their final position. And then I also used a little slinky because I needed a connection that would wrap its way around all the way from here, all the way over to that ice domino over there, or 2 ice dominoes, that would trigger the actual rotation mechanism. And so I just have a little marble path that makes that entire journey. And it also allows for these other paths, for these tricks that I'll get into later, to not be obstructed. They can just kind of rest underneath them. But then I also put in a little fun slinky connection that goes into the sky rail itself. It's not just sort of the same boring marble track. There's still some interesting things here and there. But overall, I think it makes for it's definitely I would say, yeah, I think I'm proud of it. I think it's a good section overall. I think it stands on its own. What I was trying to say is I think it stands on its own as one trick, because I know a lot of these sections have more than one trick in them, but I think this section works for what it is, even though it is only one trick. And I think the same can be said about this next section, which I will get into now. Alright, so this is the 4th section of the machine, which is the frisbee. It didn't change at all from how I initially built it. It was the first trick that I built in the machine. It was the trick I built actually before planning out the rest of the machine. But basically the basic idea of it, you have these 2 balls, they sort of duel each other, they each rotate around this sort of central point in the frisbee, and then they're going to initially go at around the same speed, but just due to natural friction and stuff being, the fact that they're free moving objects means that they're not 100% controllable in terms of the constant speed they're going to be going at when they encounter things like friction and where they are currently and then where they are relative to the other ball. A lot of different factors that will basically make one ball move slightly faster than the other eventually. It'll catch up to the other ball, and then once the 2 balls are on one side of the frisbee, or this side in particular, it'll be heavy enough to tilt this frisbee down and dispense both of them out. And then one of them just gets sorted into here, and the other one goes and activates the next trick. So it's just an interesting way to have a sort of toilet bowl spinning motion actually be useful in a machine, other than a funnel, because I feel like a funnel is sort of the normal way you would see that be used, where due to gravity, it's eventually just going to go down the hole. But in this case, it's not really due to gravity, it's more so due to friction that the ball is eventually going to catch up with the other one, and then they're going to drop. So this trick right here is a part of the final ball path section of the machine, which is probably my favorite one, honestly. Out of all 4 of them, I think this one has probably my favorite 2 tricks in it, in terms of just really interesting ball path tricks that haven't been done before. So this initial thing is just sort of a flippy dippy thing. It was pretty much exactly what I had planned. I initially planned to build it here instead of here, And that's basically the only difference with how it ended up turning out. It just flips, it does 3 full rotations, the ball stays inside the cup due to centrifugal force, and then once it reaches this point, it slaps onto the magnet and it dispenses the ball out to go into this next section. And it's really clean, there's nothing really underneath, it just barely misses the sky rail, so thankfully that sky rail was low enough to the point where I could still build this trick over top of that element, because I was aware of that when I was building this connection system. I wanted to make sure that it would not obstruct these connections. It did end up obstructing this a little bit, which I'll get into next, but thankfully the flippy dippy trick was not obstructed and it was able to retain its original magical form. So this next trick is probably one of my favorite tricks in the entire machine, which is still part of the same one ball path system. So I guess I can first mention there was the Great Pathing Crisis of 2021 was something that I had to encounter, and basically what it was I have this portal ball exiting here onto this small track down here, and it needs to somehow find a way to get up to this upper track here and go into the cup to begin the phase of this trick. The problem is there's a trick here, there's a slinky there, and there's a sky rail directly underneath it. And I need some way of making like a ball. Oh yeah, and by the way, this freaking cup thing has to swing literally here. It has to go literally up to here when it swings around and then comes into position over here. So very, very minimal spacing to work with. I ended up making an elevator because that's sort of the, I guess, with a ball lift you want to take up, with designing a ball lift that takes up minimal amount of space, like your best option is usually like something that just goes straight up, because then you can sort of place it into a small space. But I'd never really designed an elevator that could fit in that small space. So actually designing it and getting it to fit in here was a challenge, but I really, really like the way it ended up looking. The actual release for the lever, or the actual release for the elevator, is just a tiny little lever right here that's actually connected to the block. That's the stopper for the gear in this mallet trick, but it's just a tiny little lever, and it gets out of the way. The actual elevator itself is being pulled up by fishing line, which is looped through the end of this trick over here. You can see that's why the spacer is here, and between these two little wheels here in the mallet trick, that's where the actual fishing line is connected through and goes underneath the structure, and then can pull the elevator when the lever goes out of the way. But yeah, and then also the fact that I used the top of the wheel as both the wheel, the pulley, but also as the thing that knocks the ball off of the elevator shaft itself. I think there's a lot of things I really like about this, but I'm mostly just proud of the fact that I was able to get it to be in like a 1 by 1 inch section of space, which is not something I've had to do for a couple of years now, since Mousetrap Machine. Alright, so this final main trick section over here utilized a Rubik's Cube, which I don't think I've ever actually made into a trick before, even though I've had this for forever. This was loosely inspired from Lyle's, I don't know if to call it a trick. It's more of like sort of a sequence of connection systems in Vsauce machine that utilized 3 faces of a Rubik's Cube. So in his machine, it utilized like 3 different axes on a Rubik's Cube to accomplish different motions. But what I realized about a Rubik's Cube, if you're familiar with like locked Rubik's Cubes, for instance, in which a couple of the cubes are like glued together or whatever, you can still accomplish a decent amount of rotations out of that. And so like, what if I was to attach a rod onto the locked section and then have that rotate and then go along different axes? That was sort of the base for the idea. And that makes for a really, really interesting ball lift trick, I guess I should say, that not only completes a ball lift path and does 3 different rotations, rotates 3 different sides of the cube. So at first the ball goes into the cup, it goes down, and then that hits a lever which causes it to spin around, hits a lever which causes it to lift up. So it does those 3 different motions, but at the same time it's also solving the Rubik's Cube, and so you have these 2 separate entities sort of interacting with each other and going on at the same time. You don't really know necessarily which one to focus on, but both of them happen in such close proximity to each other, and both of them look both of them look cool enough to the point where it doesn't really matter that there's a lot going on and that there's 2 things that are happening at once, the ball lift trick and then the Rubik's Cube getting solved, because the Rubik's Cube getting solved only really becomes intuitive once it ends up being solved at the end when the ball lifts up and goes into this final section. So I'm really happy with that. I've once again, I've never used a Rubik's Cube in a machine before. This is the first ever time, and I'm really, really happy with the idea that I came up with it for. All right, so this is the final trick of the machine, which is also the end goal of the machine, which is to lift up and turn on a lamp. In the actual Domino World machine, the end of the machine is going to be like an end transition. There's also going to be a start transition that leads into, so that the thing is connected with the video. But for my personal video, I wanted to have a goal for the machine to be the end, just so that for like viewers of my channel who aren't familiar with Domino World will see a full-length machine that will have like a satisfying, conclusive end to it. Antarctica machine had something similar with the lights that turn on at the very end. I guess this is just what I tend to do, is do light tricks. But it was also partially inspired because Lyle's breakout machine, which is what he's calling it, is also his Domino World machine. He finished his Domino World machine way before me, but he's deciding to market it as his own sort of thing for his own personal channel, and I thought that that was a cool idea. So I came up with an idea for a goal, which was to turn on the lamp, and I built it and implemented it, and it was difficult and requires a ton of weight to actually work. The most difficult part about this, so I guess I should actually explain basically the way it works. There's a little hidden compartment over here, which is not only how my camera is charging right now, but also what's eventually going to turn on this lamp. I actually have it turned off by the switch right here right now, but generally this is actually going to turn on the extension cord, which is going to, or the power strip, which is going to turn on the lamp at the very end, which is triggered by this small little weight that will fall and tip over when the lamp lifts up. So the reason why the lamp is pushed down right now is to not obstruct the view of any of the machine and not really draw too much attention to it. I don't really want any attention to be drawn to it. Well, obviously I don't want it to block the view of the two tricks behind it, but I also don't really want people to be looking at it when other stuff is going on. And so it doesn't really become important until that last step where it lifts up and then triggers the light to go off. The most difficult part about this trick was actually doing that, getting it to lift up. You can see I just have a little simple latch here. And then I have this weird double weight system, which is similar to like one of the complicated weight tutorials Lyle did in his weight management video. It has two separate weights. I might adjust the weights even further later. I could actually maybe demonstrate this and see if it fails, because there's a problem with it getting stuck every now and then. Yeah, you can see it gets, it's stuck a little bit. It might be moving a little bit, but it's hard to tell. If I give it a little nudge, then it will start going, and then, yeah, this thing didn't even fall out, so there's problems with it. That would go like that normally, and then it would turn on the lamp. So there's definitely some fixing that I need to do. But for the most part, I was about to say, for the most part, it works perfectly. Oh yeah, I guess one last funny thing I can mention is that, I forgot to mention this when I was talking about the lamp, but the pulley system for what lifts up my lamp is actually attached to a lamp. It's actually attached to one of my lights for filming, because it's like the only tall thing that I own that would have like allowed an extension out from my wall, because I didn't really want to build this directly next to my wall, so I have a little bit of space. But I just think that's kind of funny that it's just a lamp is powering a lamp, which is just a classic Rube Goldberg, I guess.